Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about wastewater treatment. Okay, we as humans produce a lot of wastewater. We use a lot of water, and a lot of the water doesn't necessarily disappear, but after we use it, it's just no longer actually usable in any fashion. One of the most obvious, of course, would be actual waste, which would be coming from the toilet. We also produce a lot of wastewater through showers. Bathroom faucets, washers and dryers, all of that water is no longer fit for human consumption. We have a lot of water, and not all of it's necessarily ours. It's storm water, but it's still considered wastewater because it does pick up pollutants along the way as it goes across our streets and sidewalks, and then industrial water as well. So a lot of that water is quote unquote polluted, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that water is not usable. And in fact, in some areas, you can actually use what's called gray water. Gray water is water that comes from showers, comes from faucets, comes from washers and dryers, goes through a system, and then is allowed to be emitted back to plants, used for watering plants, used for watering lawns, used for washing cars. So some homes actually have a separate faucet or a separate water system just for that gray water. So there are ways to actually, within your own home, kind of reuse that to not waste so much water. Now, in order to treat water, we have to go through four major steps. The first is going to be the filtration of large items, such as any trash or poop. And then in step two, there's biological treatment using bacteria and oxygen. So they have the aeration tanks. That's the picture you saw in the very beginning, and I'll point it out again in another picture. But basically, they allow bacteria to break down the rest of the waste, any waste that's small particles but still wasty. And then in step three, that's when they disinfect it. They remove any bacteria, including the ones they added. So sorry, thank you for your service, but goodbye. And viruses from the wastewater, they use chlorine or ultraviolet light. Those are both poisonous to bacteria. And then the last would be removing any nutrients so that it doesn't cause eutrophication or blooms of other bacteria and algae in rivers where the water dumps into. So this is a diagram just showing that process. So again, we said that there's four major steps. The first step is going to be the actual removal of the particles. And as you can see, there may be more than one stage where that actually occurs, but that's the removal of the overall particles, the larger particles. Then the aeration chamber, that's where you have a lot of the material broken down by bacteria. Then the third step would be disinfection, and then the final step would be removal of nutrients before it goes out into the river. So here you can see that we have multiple, this is an actual wastewater treatment plant, and you'll notice the first thing over here is that we have and I can't remember the colors I used on the last slide, but oh well. We have our facility where we will kind of separate out the larger particles, and then that includes the settling basins, etc. And depending on the location, it may have disinfection occur earlier or later. It just depends. But the second stage would be through bioreactors. So that's where you would have your bacteria, oxygen, etc. They go through other stages where they're going to have to be broken down and clarified again, and then release through chlorine. And then in this particular plant, it doesn't have a labeled location where they would remove the nutrients, but likely that happens perhaps in the fermenter or in some of the thickeners or whatever. And then the water would be pumped out into the river. Now, we talked about wetlands before, but wetlands are really natural wastewater treatment plants. So there's actually some areas where next to a wastewater treatment plant, they would add an artificial wetland, and what that basically would do would actually do the nutrient removal process naturally rather than doing it synthetically through the actual plant. And so that basically adds nutrients to the marsh, which helps it grow, increases the size, increases the strength of the wetland, and improves the ability of it to actually pump substances through. All right, that's the end of this section, and next class we're going to be doing a lab, so make sure you're prepared.